Okay, so I think my presentation is going to be a little bit different. I'm not really going to talk about a kind of list of things that I've done in terms of reaching out to communities and such. I have a message that I want to get over. And so I'm taking a slightly different slant and talking about the research that we're doing. Tim, is that clear? Can you hear me clearly?
Perfectly clear. Perfectly
Oh,
clear.
great.
Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so I'm going to talk about my university, a little bit about my country and my positionality. I want to talk about social justice and a framework that the chair and my team, we've been using to understand open education. I want to interrogate and kind of problematize the global dynamics of North-South inequality in higher education and talk about what can be done and perhaps suggest a couple of avenues to move forward. And just always keeping in mind this very, very lofty goal that we're aiming towards to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. Okay, so a little bit about me. So yes, I am South African. I'm third generation South African, but I'm white. So sometimes that is a little surprising for people when they invite me as a Global South representative and I have a white skin. And that does make me feel uncomfortable in a way, but I am very passionate about what I believe in, and the chair encompasses my objectives. Uh, as my colleague, Professor Letseka, said earlier, South Africa itself is a country of high income inequality, and I am one of the more privileged people, middle class person. And I have had this incredible career since 2010 in open education, where I've been part of these amazing international networks through hard work, but also being given the opportunities because of my position and where I am. And some of you might recognize colleagues in these photos of big initiatives that I've been part of and that I'm very proud of being part of. So here is a picture of the University of Cape Town, the upper campus. We have a number of different campuses, and we have around about 30,000 students. We are the highest ranked university in South Africa and in Africa, and traditionally we are kind of seen as being an elite university and well-resourced. But I must add that currently we are facing the hugest debt that we've been under in the history of the university. So things aren't quite as rosy as they might seem up on the hill, as people say, as we're on the side of Devil's Peak. So that's our situation. At the University of Cape Town, we've had open education initiatives since 2007. So we've been working very hard at open education. I hope I'm still clear. I can hear a echo, which is annoying.
No, don't worry, you're fine. You're fine.
Perfect. Okay, great. So here is the backdrop. So in South Africa, we have a very strong student voice, which is very powerful in changing and has been very powerful in changing the pathways of higher education. And these so-called or termed fallist movements began around 2014. Where students initially had what they called fees must fall to try and ensure that the government would give them more support for fees, as the fees were very expensive. And they also had something called roads must fall, which was a protest against traditional colonial statues and colonial curriculum that was still being taught at institutions around South Africa. So this was kind of our background to thinking about open education and what we could do at the university to try and address these injustices. And the project that we launched at the time through the chair and even before the chair was around open textbooks. And in South Africa, open textbooks fulfill a very specific need around both access and representation. And I'm going to talk about social justice and explain some of these terms and what we're hoping to achieve. This project was initially funded by the IDRC, but fortunately is now part of university work. And we have this kind of, lofty objective of improving inclusion in South African higher education by addressing equitable access to appropriate and relevant learning resources. So we feel very strongly about the transformation of education, of the content, and of about decolonizing education, which requires all of us, and I'm saying that not just me sitting here talking to you or people in South Africa, but everyone in this audience, to think and interrogate historical legacies and dominant forms of knowledge, and to think about who they contribute, who they contribute to favoring, which groups are favored over others, and think about decolonization when you're moving forward in creating texts and in your teaching. So what is social justice? I'm not going to talk about this in too much detail because I know I'm tight for time, but social justice is a very strong theme in open education and in UNESCO and the terminology of UNESCO, where, in the conference last year, it was all about social justice and just higher education. And I like this definition by Nancy Fraser that talks about social arrangements where everyone can participate equally in society. So participatory parity. And she talks about different dimensions, economically, culturally, and politically. And we can infer this on these social arrangements on our education goal. We want everyone to be participating in education and be part of education. And how can we achieve this? And yes, Nancy Fraser is white, a white and North American feminist political social theorist, but this particular definition has been very useful for us. So when she talks about social justice, it's not just about economics. It's not just about money, material resources. It's also about where people have not been recognized in society and, in our example, in education. And then there's also political, where people have been silenced and haven't been able to be represented in society or, in our case, education. So she looks at this kind of 3 dimensions. She says you can analyze these components separately, but all 3 are necessary to address injustice. And then this is important, and I think, I'm not sure who used the word transformative earlier, but she talks about remedies on 2 levels. So some of the injustices I will talk about are the way we've used open textbooks are affirmative strategies. But when she says affirmative, it kind of means, well, it's helped the situation. It's a remedy that's corrected inequality, but it hasn't disturbed the underlying framework. Whereas transformative, which is what we're really aiming for true social justice, disturbs the underlying root causes. So we did quite a bit of research at the University of Cape Town, interviewing academics who produced open textbooks. And we wanted to understand why they were doing this and what they were hoping to achieve through their open textbooks. And we analyzed this through this social justice framework. So open textbooks most certainly are affordable and can be contextually relevant. And this is something that we needed at our institution. and across South Africa. Cultural misrecognition was addressed because open textbooks can be relevant. They can be in the language that is necessary for students to understand, as well as formats and genres that promote inclusivity. And we also saw very innovative pedagogical approaches around creating open textbooks, where students were brought in to create the textbooks. In terms of political misrepresentation, we saw that academics were aware that they were actually perpetuating political misframing and exclusion by continuously prescribing those same old textbooks that had been around for 30 years. We saw them using students, as I said already, and there was an attempt to shift power dynamics between the lecturer and the student. So the open textbook, and if we scale it up to open education, we can see how it has so much potential to achieve social justice. So does open education address underlying structures of dominance and subordination? No, not really, actually. So what we did was wonderful, but it was 47 textbooks out of the whole institution. So we need to be extending this across the country. So as we've heard, UNISA using open materials, but we want all 26 institutions to be using open material. And of course, globally. It's not that open education is everywhere in the world. And it's only then that we can think about dismantling institutional obstacles to really get participatory parity in higher education. And so this is where we kind of want to question and leave you with questions around, is the system broken? I mean, is higher education not able to change? We talk about the global south. There's this othering, there's this us and them, which as people from the global south doesn't feel like it's respect. And we want, and this term global south, although it's geographical, is kind of a subaltern. It's like we're the lower. And so the powerful research that Professor Letseka and others in the Global South are doing, and my colleague Tel will be following, and Fauzi certainly would also be in this kind of this grouping. We have the potential to try and balance relationships through open education and through getting our knowledge out into the global system. So I'm hopeful. This is a picture of university rankings around the world. This doesn't look very hopeful, but this is the reality. And I could find 10 different examples of different kind of, inequalities like this. I mean, we're the highest ranked institutions. It's quite obvious. There are a few in the global south, which is great, but it really is a point that we have to think about. How do we swing the pendulum away from the global north or to a more central position? Who is included and who is excluded in the geographies of knowledge? And we need to think about these very deep power asymmetrics and how to decolonize. We know the money is in the north and the funding is in the north. My university doesn't fund me in any way, unfortunately. Publishing is in the north. Editors of journals are based in the north. In South Africa, we struggle to get visas to come to the north. These are big problems that we need to be thinking about very deeply. And it's hard work. It's not an easy problem. And then just to, no idea whether I'm behind time, just to draw a few really interesting quotes from this Futures of Higher Education, a new social contract book by UNESCO. This new social contract calls for openness, inclusivity, and diversity. It calls for higher education as a public and common good. It calls for a rethinking of existing pedagogy, and it calls for bringing students into pedagogy and building a truly inclusive democratic higher education where students feel a sense of belonging. All principles that I could not have said myself. And these are the principles that can guide us. And so very briefly, students, I feel, are the way ahead. Angela's talked earlier about thinking about meeting students where they are. And there's a kind of movement around students as partners, and there's a journal around students as partners, and thinking about how to bring students into course design and facilitation and research and building their agency and sense of belonging. And that text in red there, the process of a product, is also about open education. It's not only about the content that we're creating. In fact, it's more importantly around the process of collaboration, of bringing voices together. That's what's powerful. And then this concept that I heard from this extremely interesting speaker about disrupting inequity in global health is a call for allyship. And it's just something to leave you with, something to think about. But from a global South perspective, I would like to call for this allyship. Fauzi spoke in some detail about this very exciting unit tour network that we are part of. And very importantly, I want to be looking at national community and building a national community. And my chair will be hosting an event next year where we'll be bringing together chairs from South Africa and with a more broader sort of hybrid format to bring in more voices. So what can we do in the Global South? We have to agitate. If we don't, and we sit back and we take more information from the Global North, we're just being recolonized. We need to take on, as I said, the hard work and question and think about how we can work for equity and inclusion. And this a last quote from UNESCO, and just a comment about learning content, that it should be finely calibrated, and this are not my words, finely calibrated to local cultures, societies, languages, histories, literatures, and natural environments. And this is by Cope and Kalansis. It's a really interesting article on the paradoxes of OER. But that's what we need to be aiming for wherever we are in the world, to put our students at the front and foremost way of thinking about how we can design our materials. That's me. Thank you. Did you hear everything?
Absolutely perfectly. I just forgot to press the button. Sorry about that.
Okay, great.
No, it's a very nice, very thought-provoking presentation. I just very briefly want to pick up on one point you made, which was the same point that John Traxler made this morning, and that's the importance of decolonizing content. I mean, okay, it sounds nice, bottom-up, community-driven content, but it's actually difficult to do. Resisting our influences is an uphill struggle. Do you think that AI would have a role to play in that process to actually help us debug our thinking processes and produce more socially coherent materials?
So at the moment, no. I think there's too many inherent biases built into the content that's being created by AI. We know this. We would have to work make a very concerted effort in the Global South to make sure that our content is also included in those AI models. Having said that, there is a role for AI in producing open education materials for sure. I've got a case study that we've just been looking at where students created orthopedic surgery chapters, and a really interesting learning process. Quick content, but they were critical of the content. They had incredible critical digital AI literacy that we were not aware that students could have. We were really impressed with them. Plus, they had experts reviewing the material so that they could check for accuracy. And what was produced was really interesting material. And it was quite it certainly is an option for open education resources that we can be thinking about AI to produce those kinds of local materials. So these were local materials with local examples and built into that text. So there's a lot of I'm quite pro AI, except I'm very aware that there are biases, and that scares me.